Hello everyone, I'm Dylan, and today we'll delve into a distressing and startling case involving murder, betrayal, and money. The public was completely taken aback by this intricate case that unfolded over several years. It serves as a stark reminder of how swiftly an individual's pursuit of wealth can transform them into a monster, even if it means betraying their own family. This is the tragic tale of Elizabeth Vasquez, a delightful and diligent woman whose life was cut short in a scheme driven by her heartless and greedy daughter, Elita, and her boyfriend, Fernando. In 1967, a girl was born in Cajamarca in northwestern Peru. Vasquez's family welcomed their baby girl and named her Elizabeth Vasquez Movila. Ernesta Vasquez and Maria Moila had 6 children, and Elizabeth was the eldest. They worked diligently to provide their children with a good education and the desired lifestyle. The Vasquez family led a happy and peaceful life. After some time, Elizabeth began assisting her mother with household chores and taking care of her siblings. Elizabeth was an exceptional child, excelling in her studies and graduating with top honors, gaining admission to a reputable university with a faculty of law and economics. At the university, she met Alejandro Mendez Espino, a fellow law student known for his academic prowess. They started dating, eventually falling deeply in love. Elizabeth's parents approved of their daughter's choice, and the couple officially tied the knot in 1987, even before completing their university education. Alejandro, a caring and supportive husband, provided for his wife. After their marriage, the couple initially lived in the Vasquez family home. However, 6 months into Elizabeth's pregnancy with their first child, they moved to a separate residence. In 1988, they welcomed their first baby girl, Elita, bringing happiness and joy to the entire family. After Elita's birth, the successful couple relocated to Peru's capital, Lima, as both pursued thriving careers. Alejandro became a prosecutor in an anti-corruption department, while Elizabeth established her legal consulting firm. Despite their hard work for the family, the couple, engrossed in their careers, decided to hire a nanny for their daughter. Unfortunately, the nanny failed to fulfill her duties. In response, Elizabeth chose to send Elita to her grandparents, Ernesto and Maria, who gladly agreed to take care of their granddaughter. Here is the point of notice. Elizabeth's younger sister, Giovanna, was a couple of years older than her daughter, Elita. They soon shared a healthy, young bond and started living like real sisters. Her parents were too busy with work commitments, so they often saw her daughter and tried to impress her by giving her gifts. Elita lived with their grandparents for a long time and started schooling there. Her parents wanted to get her back home, but adjusting to a noisy, different place was difficult, as she had been habitual to living in a peaceful Cataró. Elita was a well-mannered kid and was also a brilliant student academically. Her mother tried to be her best friend, with whom she could share everything about her life. She tried to compensate for the long separation from her daughter. By the age of 15, Elita listened and obeyed her mother. But afterward, Elita's behavior changed. She seemed to be a rude and discourteous person. She got into bad company and stole money from her parents' wallet. Elizabeth wondered if her daughter was in a teenage phase and would behave better with time, but when Elita grew up, she almost regularly started arguments with her mother. Alejandro, Elita's father, kept himself neutral, but when Elita wanted him by her side, he took Elita's side. Elita was unhappy due to continuous comparison with her mother, Elizabeth. Elizabeth was a kind, efficient, and hard-working lady. In contrast, Elita was overweight, lazy, and ugly, and didn't hesitate to do wrong things like lying, theft, etc. Elita desired to have plastic surgery in the complex of her mother. Elizabeth gained confidence in her daughter, built her relationship, and didn't want to discourage her. Elizabeth decided to have a rhinoplasty for her daughter, and a few years later, a few more surgeries took place. In 2007, Alejandro and Elizabeth separated after 20 years of marriage. Elita blamed her mother for separating her from her father. The divorce occurred in the United States when they lived there. They mutually decided that their daughter would stay with her mother until she became an adult. They got into a fierce argument, and then Elita called her father, sobbing, and asked him to bring her along. However, Alejandro had moved on with a new lover and always convinced her daughter to unite with her mother until she finished her university and became independent. Because of her poor academic performance, Elita's parents decided to enroll their daughter in a prestigious and remarkable university of law in Peru. The education was expensive there, but they didn't want to compromise their daughter's future with money. At 19, Elita fell in love with a young man for the first time. One day, that was a day of Sunday when Elita went to a church and met a handsome man named Fernando Gonzalez. He was so obsessed with Elita and couldn't get her eyes off her. Afterward, he approached her and introduced himself to Elita. Fernando was cool, charming, and a gentleman. He asked Elita for a coffee date and some chit-chat. He had a habit of investigating those girls who came to church in luxury cars and well-dressed. He attracted girls by their sensitive and charming behavior, played on their sympathies toward him, and told them a sobbing story of his childhood when his father got abandoned when he was too young, and now he has to support her mother and educate his siblings. He worked hard and did multiple jobs for his family. Innocent and rich girls would sympathize and give him some money. Sometimes, he tried to maintain a rich girlfriend, but after some months, they would leave him when his truth was revealed in front of a girl. But the reality of this guy was that he was an unemployed loafer who caught girls in her charming behavior and personality. He loved to live a wealthy lifestyle, so he tried to use girls for their money. Elita had already faced a complex situation due to her unattractive personality, so she couldn't believe anybody even noticed her. She got easily trapped in Fernando's fake personality. As she deeply fell in love with him, she decided to give everything she had and her mother had. The point to be remembered here is that the guy had only loved Elita's money, not her. Elita shared everything about the guy and their first sudden meetup with her mother. Elizabeth thought this was the best time to get closer to her daughter. She also wondered if the guy was a good person and decided to meet up. At the first meeting, Fernando portrayed himself as a well-mannered, intelligent, and needy boy, and successfully made a good impression on Elizabeth by telling her fake sad life story. Elizabeth decided he was a good boy and deserved a better lifestyle and education. She rented a beautiful, comfortable house near Central Lima and decided to pay 70% of the monthly rent. She also paid for his tuition for business school and guaranteed that he would land a job at her company. It was clear that Fernando accepted her kindness toward him and started studying, whereas he had no interest in boring lectures or working. He just wanted to spend endless amounts of someone else's money. He happily moved into the rented apartment, but never paid a penny for that, and claimed to be a financially broken person. Elizabeth gave him a second chance and provided a job as a courier man in her office. On that day, he could do a simple task and betray other employees with important documents. That day, Elizabeth learned that Fernando was playing with her daughter for her money. He has no pure feelings for Elita and does not want to make any effort to get work done. When Elizabeth wanted to tell the reality of that guy, Elita screamed at her in anger and cried and said that her mother did not let her be with her partner and wanted to ruin her life and didn't want to see her happy with Fernando. Elita refused to listen to her mother and started seeing Fernando. Then Elizabeth decided to send Elita to her grandparents' home, wondering if Elita didn't see her boyfriend for a few months. Her feelings would cool down and she would forget him, and Fernando find another girl to make her fool. But here, Elizabeth was mistaken. Elita was continuously in touch with her boyfriend through calls and social media. Elizabeth refused to pay for a rental apartment, and the boy had to leave the apartment. This thing grew Elita's anger for her mother. Fernando found a small place for himself from her girlfriend's mother's money. Elita had access to her mother's account to spend freely as a spoiled child. When summer got off and the university resumed, she rushed to meet her boyfriend. Again, he demanded an extensive amount from her. Elita unquestioningly trusts him that he also loves her, but in reality, he is not. Elita withdrew a huge amount of money from her mother's account. Later, Elizabeth decided to block her daughter's access from her account as massive transactions had taken place from her account. She decided to give her only a limited weekly allowance for her expenditures. This action, Elizabeth took a turn in her life. She and her daughter always got into an argument. Elizabeth tried to connect with her daughter but was unsuccessful. They started a horrific plan for her mother. One day they were on a romantic date, and Fernando asked Elita for money. Still, Elita couldn't bring the demanded amount, and Fernando got angry, screamed at her, and cursed Elizabeth that she had a huge amount of money in her account, but she couldn't give it to her only daughter. He told Elita that if her mother disappeared between them, then all the money would be owned by Elita, and they would live a happy, luxurious life. This plan got stuck in Elita's mind, and she kept thinking about it. She started talking about her mother, that she had ruined her life, and she didn't like her. She blamed her for all her complexes. She started assuming her life, how she would be happy without her mother. Elita and her boyfriend started planning to vanish her mother and thought about whom they could involve in this terrifying plan. At that time, Elizabeth had $3 million in her account. They could sell it and buy a luxury house in an elite area. When Elizabeth disappeared, her only daughter automatically owned all her money. Elizabeth's life was in danger. She got signs that her life wasn't safe. As an experienced lawyer, she decided to write a will stating that in case of her disappearance or death, all her money and property would be transferred to her father, Saint Vasquez. She went to visit her parents and tell them about her decision. On the other hand, Elita had planned to kidnap and murder her mother. They hired a professional rough man named Jorge Carneo Ruiz, who had experience in kidnapping and murders and couldn't be found after the crime. Elita and Fernando offered him a good amount for this case. The man agreed without a second thought. On 24th January 2010, Elita and her boyfriend Fernando finalized the plan for the next day when they kidnap Elizabeth. Elita was only dreaming about spending millions of dollars, which would be in her hands soon. On 25th of January 2010, the next morning, Elita didn't go to her university and stayed home because she was not feeling well. As per her routine, Elizabeth went to her office. According to their plan, Fernando and Jorge were waiting for Elita outside the house so Elita could distract guards and they could come inside. Elita went to the guard and asked them to bring medicines for her. The pharmacy was 5 minutes from the house, and it would be enough for the boys to come inside and hide in the main bedroom. When Elizabeth returned home, Elita dropped a water glass in the kitchen as a sign of returning her mother home. When Elizabeth entered the room, Fernando knocked her to the ground and started beating her with Jorge. Elizabeth tried to escape in a hallway where Elita kicked her mother in the head. When Elizabeth was unconscious, Fernando and Jorge tied her up. Their arrangements were upset by a young servant, Maria Celine. Elita caught her in another room and locked her. When Elizabeth got her senses back, she saw her daughter, her boyfriend, and their partner severely annoyed her, attempting to figure out the code to the safe and passwords to her financial balances. Elizabeth realized her daughter was in a difficult situation but had consistently put it on Fernando's terrible impact now that she saw the appalling treatment of her daughter. Elizabeth figured out how to loosen the chains and hit back against her daughter, scratching and punching her until Fernando hit her to the ground. An angry, furious Elita kicked her mom, lastly, got a pillow, and pushed her until she lost her breath. The three bound the dead body, taped her mouth shut, and set Elizabeth in the storage compartment of her car. Elita then sent one more guard to get medicine. She later enlightened a frightened Maria, dishonestly guaranteeing that she and her mom had struggled yet made up, and that her mom had hit with a weird story of snatching the quest for a missing lady. In the first part of the day, the young servant girl was making breakfast when Elita came to the kitchen and told her that her mom had gone to work early on for a meeting. After that, Elita went out to her mom's work office. There, she ran into the office of Jessica Hippo, her mom's best friend, and sadly told her mom was absent and that she was getting weird threats and calls. The accountant quickly began blocking the records to prevent the intruders from accessing them. The incident was reported to the police, and she left the workplace for some time. When she returned, Elita was gone, and the workplace was messy, as though somebody was searching for something. Later, it was known that Elizabeth's will was missing, which Elita had found out about the day before hearing a phone discussion. She used a key she had taken from her mom. Elita had likewise taken a duplicate of the will and money from the safe in her mom's study room. Police examined the house, investigating the missing lady's daughter and the workplace staff, but acquired no significant information. She was generally guaranteed that Vasquez had no enemies and nobody had threatened her, so nobody was initially recorded as a suspect. The critical theory was that it was a case of kidnapping for money. Everything left was waiting for the criminal's call to get further directions and demands. Additional guidance and the principal suspect came the day after Elizabeth vanished, and she realized it was accounted for. Her vehicle was found deserted, and the inner side of the car was empty. But when cops opened the storage compartment, they were surprised by what they tracked down inside lay the dead body of a missing lady with indications of violence. Forensic specialists counted many injuries, extreme head injury, and rope stains on the victim's body, demonstrating that the lady had been restricted and attempted to free herself. It was equally resolved that suffocation particles of blood and epithelium caused Vasquez's death were found under her fingernails, saying that she had resisted it. Recently, it was essential to figure out who the blood belonged to a place at the setup. Elita showed up as a grief-stricken daughter. She cried, moaned, and appeared to be practically unconscious anyway. At the interrogation, she acted differently. She was quiet, even unfeeling, and with the inquiries of the specialists, she was irritated. Moreover, she continually went against herself in her declaration when the police chose to check the data about the calls from the kidnappers and sent a request to the phone company. It worked out that Elita got no calls. Likewise, it turned out that in the days when her mom was vanishing, Elita had been in regular contact with one Fernando Gonzalez. The investigator chose to investigate him as well. They will look into the young man and demand his honesty or stay quiet, undeniable proof, and a capture. Elizabeth's maternal grandparents were responsible for her funeral, while Elizabeth herself was impassive, thinking about how to escape this current situation. She called her dad, who already knew of what had occurred, and, crying, told him of her innocence and requested help. Her dad suggested she not talk too much and promised to get her out of this situation, even though he realized who had been involved in this crime entirely well. He didn't want his daughter to go to jail since it would have created a shaded area of disgrace for Alejandro, who at the time held the high office of Equity of Harmony and was the leader of the High Court and was a strong and regarded man. However, the reports showed that the blood and skin particles under the dead body's fingernails had belonged to her daughter. Elita attempted to convince herself that she had a severe argument with her mom, and they shortly got into a fight. However, at that point, nobody accepted her excuse. Further inspection of Elizabeth's room with unique equipment uncovered various traces of blood throughout the house, remembering in Elita's room despite her actions to wipe away the proof. Elita's story is that she argued with her mom that evening. However, at that point, she made up and claimed that her mom left early for work the following day and was never seen again. Elita went against herself first, saying she had not gone into her mom's room, and afterward, she recalled that Elita had received threatening calls that she had dramatized. The declaration of the servant Maria Chalet assumed a conclusive part of the situation. She told us that on the evening of the crime, Elita locked her in a room where she heard Elizabeth's shouts and hints of fighting but couldn't help. After that night, she didn't see her ma'am again. Elita demanded that everything be great with her mom, who had gone to work early. All of this scenario leads to the arrest of Elita and her boyfriend. The three criminals and the fight for the property and money, Elita was captured at her mom's home. Her boyfriend was confined after a couple of hours, and the following day, Jorge was arrested, deceived by Fernando, who attempted to impose the crime on him. It is critical that Fernando, who initially started to confirm, trust that collaboration with the examination would help him and assist with moderating the sentence. In the meantime, Alejandro recruited the best lawyers for his daughter, but understood that she could not get away from punishment. Simultaneously, he started to manage Vasquez's legacy, planning to take it for himself since the will had vanished, and the heirs were confronting a long jail sentence. He guaranteed that he and Elizabeth had never divorced but lived separated and remained legally married. Ernesto Vasquez, Elita's grandfather, chose to visit his only beloved granddaughter in prison to look at her without looking into her eyes, as he could hardly imagine how the young lady he had known and raised since the earliest stages could carry out such a terrible incident. Elita acted arrogantly, screamed, insulted the older man, and said she didn't wish to see him again. This experience extremely upset him, and he had a cardiac failure, from which he couldn't recover and died after 6 months. The Vasquez family couldn't demonstrate the presence of the will left in Ernesto's name, as the report vanished from Elizabeth's office, and the legal officials' data set dealt with by Alejandro, all records and references to the couple's separation, also oddly disappeared, giving Alejandro the option to guarantee that the departed's legacy. The initial decision, regardless of actions by Elita, Fernando, and Jorge, was to move the crime onto one another. The examination effectively recreated the occasions of that game-changing night and laid out the job of every crime member. It was likewise demonstrated that the triplets acted in a purposeful scheme that extraordinarily bothered their responsibility. A decisive job in the preliminary was played by the declaration of the servant Maria, who expressed that Alejandro had often threatened Elizabeth. She gave an alternate version of the occasion, but would not consent. In May 2012, the court viewed the three accused as guilty. At first, the examiner had mentioned that every member of the murderer be condemned to 30 years imprisonment. While the men confessed, Elita continually played the victim. Fernando and Jorge were, in the end, condemned to 28 years each. Elita's trial was delayed. Elita asserted that the criminals were employed by family members on her mom's side who created the legacy story to claim Elizabeth's property and cash. Her dad held a similar version of occasion actions to claim Elita was disturbed and exposed to control by criminals. This methodology proposed by Alejandro was to send her to a mental emergency hospital rather than jail, declaring her crazy and unequipped for entirely and exclusively acquiring his wife's estate. At last, in December 2012, the court conveyed its final decision condemning Elita to the most significant term of 30 years in jail. Until now, she and her assistant have been punished in prison. The disputed inheritance stays unsettled. Alejandro died in the spring of 2021 without turning into the main heir. The Vasquez family, through the court, tries to bar Elita from being deprived of petitioners to Elizabeth's property, referring to the way that she is detained for murder. Currently, the primary petitioner for the legacy is Maria Moyla, Elizabeth's mom. Thanks for watching. This was Dylan. Please subscribe.